Hello and welcome to Demented Squirrel Crafts. This week we're going to be making a coffee-inspired Lunakins, inspired by October and autumn and fall and cooler days. So we're going to use a 9cm or 3.5-inch polystyrene bowl. We're going to base it in the usual way. The link for the more in-depth video about basing and why we do it this way is in the description. I'm going to base it with some reddy purple chestnut brown colour, bog standard brown colour, and we cover the entire bowl and then we poke holes in the clay so that the moisture has somewhere to escape to. By basing the bowl this way, when we put the second layer on, it doesn't crack, it doesn't break, it adheres really well. So I'm going to make the stomach part of the creature inspired by coffee art, where the baristas pour the milk in and they can make flowers and all sorts of stuff. So that's what I'm doing. So I'm using a little bit of cornstarch to make sure that the clay doesn't stick to the silicone sheet, and I've mixed the clay in sort of a swirl pattern to mimic the top of a coffee. We use cornstarch because cornstarch is translucent. Talcum powder gives a white sheen. It's really good if you want to make pastel colours, but cornstarch is translucent, so you can use it with everything. It'll dry out your clay, it'll stop it from sticking, and then just to reactivate it, you just add some moisture to the clay, so water, or I use alcohol because it evaporates quickly. So here we're just going to mimic how the coffee art is done with the milk by making basically teardrop shapes of clay, adding them onto the center, and then we're going to flatten it and try and make this very pretty shape. I live in a city where they're just coffee is their way of life, you know, from a corta to espresso to cafe latte to just every sort of types of coffee, and everybody is very much into their coffee. I like my tea, but it's very much British tea. But this, because October 1st is International Day of Coffee, I thought we will start back with making a coffee Lunakin inspired by all types of different coffees. So just adding a little few details here, and then I'm going to add some texture to it so it looks like the way the top of the coffee is like all bubbly and that sort of texture. So we're just going to adhere it to the ball, and then you need to leave it to dry before we do the next bit. I'm trying out these tools. These are Sculpey pearl tools, so you put a little blob of foam in the end. It has a concave shape, and then you can push it into the foam and it makes like a tiny little pearl. They come in different sizes. The pointy end is to make holes in beads and that sort of thing. I may cut them down because they're super long for me. It's useful to have if you're trying to make indented, semicircles kind of thing. But sometimes it's just faster to roll a little ball of clay in your hand and push it on. But, they're interesting tools to have, and they're not super expensive. So we're going to leave that to dry now while we make up all of the clay for the coffee. So this is the brown and a little bit of black. And you want to basically mix this very well. You can see the difference of adding the black to the brown and the brown to the black so that it's a dark coffee color. Make sure you seal up your bag so it doesn't dry out. So we're just going to put it on in a little sort of pea-shaped, and then I'm using a silicone tool to try and make the little divot that's in a coffee bean in every single one. And so we're just going to roll out a little ball, put it on, put the silicone nib into it, make it as you can see on screen, you know how the coffee beans are, and just repeat that all over the body. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to speed up this part of it, because in reality this takes, I think it was about an hour and a half to put all the beans on. So I'm doing 20 times speed so that you can see it all being done. every line I change direction of the way that the beans lay and how that middle sprout part is. I'm just using a roll of tape in order to hold the ball so that it doesn't wander off all over the place on my desk. So yeah, it is very much just keep going. I quite often will leave this halfway to dry out and then do the second part and that sort of thing, depending on the type of day it is. It's still quite warm here where I live, about 26 degrees Celsius. I'm not entirely sure what that is in Fahrenheit, so 78 degrees Fahrenheit, that sort of thing, and it is October. So now I'm going to make all the tail and the horns and everything made to look like steam, made to look swirly and fluid, so it looks like steam. So I'm just taking white clay and I'm rolling it out, twisting it, and then turning it so it looks like a plume of steam. So this is the tail. We're just going to add it onto the back and then cover where it's attached to the body. We're just going to cover that with some more coffee beans so that it covers up the join. And it's just little details like this where you can hide your seams and make it all look fluid and cohesive. There you go, we're letting that dry. And so now I'm making the horns. I'm using a piece of acrylic just so that, because it rolls really evenly and you don't have to use your fingers, you can use a ruler, you can use any piece of plastic. I just have a piece of acrylic. You can buy them as well, but I have access to a maker space so I can get them to cut me a piece of acrylic. So I make a whole bunch more than I'll need, and then I let them dry. And then I'm going to use my chopstick in order to poke a hole in to attach the horns. I'm going to put two in and I'm going to wrap them around each other so that they are so they look more like steam than just regular horns. At the end of the video I am going to put on a thing, because this is the face that is not the face that it ends up with. This is the original face. I decided I hated it and removed it. So at the end of the video, I have the failures of the faces. I think it took me 4 or 5 attempts to get the face the way I wanted it. Some days it's just the face doesn't work. So when I make horns and stuff, I often make more than I would need, because I might change how it looks depending on what I feel like on the day. As you can see, this face is a little mouth. I decided I hated it and then took it all off. So this is the final face that I've put on once I'd removed everything else. And then I'm using plushy eyes or teddy bear eyes, and I'm just poking them straight into the clay so that they have that piercing stare of somebody who needs coffee, or maybe has had too much coffee. So I went to put on like a couple of little freckles on the side, and then I changed my mind later and added tiny little bubbles. Once I had done all the other details, I decided it needed something a bit more. But yeah, this is just making sure everything is looking right the way I want it. I decided to make ears for this creature. I was going to make big long floppy ears like a bunny rabbit, like a hop 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 bunny rabbit, but instead I decided to make little tiny like deer like ears, one side down, one side up. I used the leftover clay from the tummy, and that I just shaped it out a little bit and used the chopstick to make it roundy on the edge. I used quite a lot of fondant icing baking tools in my clay work because they're easy. This is a icing tip that you use to make grass, and I use it to make little tufts of fur. It's especially useful for going inside ears, or if you're doing actual grass in a diorama or something, it's used for that, and I just put it in that way. Just taking a little bit because it's a little bit too big, and then just use my pokey stick to push it in there like that. I used to cook I used to bake cookies years ago, so I have a lot of like extra tools, but you can pick that tool up probably really easily in any shop. So at the end I decided that it needed more little details, so I decided to add little bubbles like you get in your coffee. There's always little bubbles. Now normally those bubbles are clear, but you can't do clear in clay foam, so I just rolled lots of little small balls and added tiny little bubbles around the face and around the body a little bit in order to make it look frothy or foamy and make it look a little bit more textured and a little bit more, I don't know, cute, I suppose, would be the way to do it. Added an extra little swirl at the back, one of the leftover horns, so it has a little bit more steam. But there you go, that's it finished. So that's my inspiration page, you know, with my coffees and stuff like that. And this is the final little coffee creature. You can see here the details and the coffee beans and the different colors and how the textures work up close. And I just want to give a shout out to anybody who supported me, especially the last few months, which have been weird and hard in different ways. So thank you to everybody who's been super supportive and sent me lovely messages. So thanks for watching. And then this is the bit that about the faces. Okay, so faces are hard because they have so much personality. So the problem is you put on the clay, and then because clay sticks to clay, then you take it off, you've got a mound of stuff there. So yeah, I hated the smile in this, and then I was like, maybe if I make it big eyes, maybe I'll make it small eyes. And then I took it off again and put it back on again, and I like the more oval shape, as you can see there. Again, thanks for watching. See you soon. Bye.